Former Presidents Kgalema Motlanthe and Festus Mogae says that Africa must stay vigilant and ready to deal with the COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak. 3 African countries, including Egypt, Algeria and Nigeria, have confirmed cases of the virus. Motlanthe has taken over as the new chair of the Champions for an AIDS-Free Generation in Africa. Our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, spoke to both former presidents about the campaign against HIV AIDS and also the impact of COVID-19 coronavirus.
We feared when we appeared to be succeeding and the many deaths and illnesses associated with HIV about 10 years ago were going down. And by the time some of us were leaving office, we then formed these Champions for an HIV-Free Generation because we feared that there will come a time when those illnesses, emaciated people, many funerals will no longer be remembered, which is the case now. And therefore, new infections are increasing. So the infection curve in our countries, not only Southern Africa, and even Central and Western Africa, it's going up again. And that's what we are crying about. What we feared would happen is happening. And we are trying to say, hey, as we told you, but of course we can't speak as if we are boasting, because we are actually lamenting the fact that the new infections, in fact, are mostly among young people, the very people we wanted to protect from this scourge.
This is the future.
This is our very future. And that's where it's taking place fastest.
Are we complacent, or are these young people or this generation kind of oblivious in terms of the impact of this problem?
I think we adults maybe have not preached as much about the existence of the danger as we should have. Perhaps I'm not saying that is necessarily the case, but obviously some of these people were young and did not see those many deaths and the emaciated people, and therefore they are falling victim to something they should have listened or to us, but they did not experience the first wave of many deaths and so on, and they are falling victim to it. Of course, we could say, fortunately for them, there is a cure now. There are antiretrovirals, but then even there, you need to test and know your status and start treatment in time if you are not going to be seriously affected by the disease, by the virus.
But we're still struggling with the cure to date.
We're still struggling with the cure. But in fact, if you know your status in time and you take antiretrovirals, you won't die. You won't die, really.
President Motlanthe, you spoke about previously 2 million, now South Africa standing at 7 million. Quite scary.
Yes, it is quite scary, and it's indicative of our failure to, stem the tide of new infections. The testing and counseling campaign reached almost 22 million South Africans at the time, and through that campaign, many of them ended up knowing their status and therefore taking treatment. But today, as I speak, I'm told there's still 3 million who are not on treatment, but who are positive. Yeah.
You are taking over as the new chair for this important campaign. What will be your priority?
Well, we, as the champions, have also identified a concomitant problem of drug abuse. That, people who use needles and stuff like that are vulnerable to be infected, and in the process, the containment of the spread of this scourge is undermined by drug abuse, and therefore we need to broaden our campaign to also include drug abuse in raising awareness and looking at new ways of how to give support to those who are using drugs in a manner which saves them from all the negative effects of drug abuse here.
President Mogae, on something different, we are now dealing with coronavirus. You told us that you'll be going to the US and you are worried. What must leaders on the continent do to ensure that we don't have a similar problem?
I'm not as familiar with the new virus as I was with the old one. I am told, I rely on the news like you. I'm told actually people of my age are more vulnerable to it. You either get it and die, but if you are healthy and young, apparently you are relatively safe.
Do you think the continent has got capacity to educate and also to ensure that there are preemptive measures taken to ensure that we don't have a similar scourge like we had HIV?
I think we should. A number of our countries have set up testing centers for arrivals from abroad. You know that there were 5 people who were suspected in Botswana. Actually, it was 2 who came from China. And then 3 volunteered, rang and said, we also come from China and we want to come and be tested. So there were 5 of them, and fortunately they all tested negative. So now, of course, it's spreading. It has reached the United States, and they say they are not clear how those people who are being affected in the west coast of the United States, they have never been to China, and they cannot recall being in company of anybody from China. So that is a further complication. Of course, we are just nervous here in Africa, all of us, young and old. I hope that it won't be as bad. Okay, we can only hope it won't be as bad. And then if it kills, apparently, well, I suppose it kills the likes of us. Maybe it's better. Unfortunately, if it.
But
kills,
we still need your wisdom.
Yes, we also want to leave, but apparently that's what it does. That's what Trump says.
President Motlanthe, how do we deal with this new announcement that we now have this coronavirus in our doorstep on the continent, looking at Algeria, Nigeria, and Egypt?
Well, we've been forewarned, and since this is a contagious disease, it is important also not to mix as freely as we used to, and that is why countries like Italy have had to suspend their footballing fixtures, just to make sure that you don't have large numbers of people under the same roof, where if there's one, a whole lot of people can be infected in that way. So we've been sufficiently forewarned. We ought to take precautionary steps and prepare accordingly so that we are not caught off guard. The problem in some countries, I'm told, in South Korea, for instance, that there was a religious group that had gone to, pilgrimage in China and came back as a group, and only to find that some of them were infected, and not all of them were then quarantined, and that's how they ended up with large numbers as well.
South Africa evacuating South Africans in China at the epicenter, and there's a concerns, particularly from those South Africans, that the stigma, how do we deal with stigma? The same way we have been working very hard to ensure that we deal with stigma on HIV and AIDS.
Well, stigma is really born of ignorance of how, a contagious disease gets to spread, and also prejudice. For instance, if people see you wearing a mask, they may want to keep a safe distance from you. But masks are not really the virus, as it were.
They are a preventive mechanism.
That's right. But people conflate the wearing of a mask with coronavirus, and so we ought to, through public communication means, ensure that people are not driven into paranoia, but they are informed as to what preventative measures should really be followed and adhered to.